So, what do you think happens when a country has no mountains, no natural walls, and no fortress cliffs? Basically, I'm talking about a land as flat as a pancake with nowhere to hide. Well, if you said they get invaded a lot, you'd be correct. But here's the twist. For centuries, the Dutch didn't hide behind rocks. They hid behind water. And that is the story of the Netherlands we're going to uncover today. This tiny strip of flat land in northwestern Europe has spent most of its history being someone else's territory. The Romans showed up first around 55 BC and held the region for nearly 4 centuries. When Rome started crumbling, Germanic tribes moved in. Then came the Franks, who were arguably the most powerful of the bunch. They eventually built an empire so dominant that by the 9th century, the Netherlands was just another piece of Charlemagne's massive puzzle. But after Charlemagne's empire fell apart, the region splintered into smaller duchies, ruled by local counts and dukes. So at the time, it was no surprise that power was fragmented and borders were blurry, which, in retrospect, actually made the Netherlands the perfect target. That's when we encounter Spain. In 1555, a man named Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, King of Spain, and Lord of the Netherlands, handed the whole region over to his son, Philip II. Now, Philip was deeply, intensely Catholic. And the Netherlands? Well, by this point, the Protestant Reformation had swept through like wildfire, which meant a huge portion of the population had converted. You'd think it was just a simple religious disagreement, but in reality, it was more of a cultural fault line. In other words, it was a problem. And Philip's solution? Send troops in and crush it. Yeah, that was a huge mistake, because what followed was 80 years of war, aka the Dutch Revolt. It started around 1568, and it was extremely brutal and messy. It was the kind of conflict where truces fell apart and alliances shifted mid-battle. In the end, the Spanish forces reconquered the southern Netherlands, or what is now Belgium, but the northern provinces held on. And during that last bit of resistance came a silver lining. For the first time, the people of this region started thinking of themselves not as subjects of a foreign king, but as Dutch. Yeah, the reality is, national identity doesn't come from good times. It usually comes from fighting for something together. So by 1648, Spain finally admitted defeat, and the Treaty of Münster made it official. According to the document, the Dutch Republic was a sovereign, independent nation. And let's be real, after 80 years of war, they had earned it. And then, almost immediately, they experienced their greatest era. Because the 17th century is what the Dutch call the Golden Age. Amsterdam became a powerful trading hub because every time ships left Dutch ports, they would come back with spices, silk, and silver. And yes, that's also when the Dutch East India Company was born. If this sounds familiar to you, that's because it's basically the world's first multinational corporation. It was founded in 1602 to monopolise the spice trade and compete with Spanish and British interests. Oh, and here's a fun fact for you. You might have heard that at its peak, it was valued at over $8 trillion in today's money. Now, while that's a legendary internet stat, it's a bit of a mathematical stretch. Though one thing is true, even by conservative estimates, they were wealthier than most modern tech giants combined. But that's a topic for another video. If you're interested in that, let me know in the comments below. Now, going back to the Netherlands' golden age. It was more than a time of prime trade. It was also a time when scientists, philosophers, and artists from across Europe flocked to the Netherlands because it was one of the few places that actually welcomed new ideas. Rembrandt was painting, Spinoza was philosophizing, all while the world was watching. Things were shaping up nicely. But then the 18th century happened, and here's the rundown. Wars with Britain and France had drained the Dutch Republic's resources. Then, the French arrived. By 1795, France had effectively taken over, but it was in 1806 that Napoleon turned the Netherlands into a kingdom, putting his own brother Louis on the throne. So, for a brief window, the Netherlands became a French satellite state. When I say brief, I mean just under 2 decades of French influence. Because in 1813, as Napoleon's power faded, the Dutch reclaimed their land. And when the dust eventually settled at the Congress of Vienna, a new kingdom of the Netherlands emerged. This time, it reunited the Dutch, the Belgians, and the Luxembourgers under one crown. Spoiler, that too didn't last. Belgium broke away in 1830, and Luxembourg followed in 1890. Despite that, the modern Dutch state was coming together. When World War I happened, the Netherlands stayed neutral, which was a smart move. Too bad it didn't work twice. Because in 1940, Nazi Germany invaded anyway, so for 5 years, the Netherlands lived under occupation. The Nazis systematically targeted Dutch Jews. Among them was a 13-year-old girl hiding in an Amsterdam annex with her family, writing in a diary. You probably know her by name, Anne Frank, and her story alone captures what those years cost. When Dutch resistance grew stronger, the Nazis retaliated by cutting off food supplies in the winter of 1944. It became known as the Hongerwinter, or the Hunger Winter. Thousands of people starved. When the war ended in 1945, sure, there was liberation, but there was also reconstruction. The Netherlands needed to rebuild itself again. And in these next couple of chapters, we'll see exactly what came out of that. But you know what they say, better to show than tell. So if you want to see it for yourself, I've linked great flight and accommodation deals in the description below. You'd think that after everything the Dutch fought through, they'd end up somewhere with a few security measures in place. Maybe a couple of mountains to hide behind. Instead, they ended up here, a country so flat and so low that about 26% of it sits below sea level. And if you count the areas at risk of flooding, we're talking about half the country. You want to know what the highest point of the country is? It's called Val-sur-Berg, down in the southern province of Limburg. It peaks at just 322 metres, or about 1,058 feet. For reference, in most other countries, that's not even a mountain. It's more like a foothills warm-up. Yet somehow the Netherlands is one of the most livable, most visited, and most economically powerful places on Earth. So, it begs the question, how? How did they achieve that? Well, the Netherlands sits in northwestern Europe, sandwiched between Germany to the east and Belgium to the south, with the North Sea stretching out to the north and west. In terms of size, it's about 41,865 square kilometres, or just about 16,164 square miles. And cutting through all that land are three major rivers, the Rhine, the Meuse, and the Scheldt. This is important to know because when a huge chunk of your land is below sea level, having three massive rivers pass through is basically an invitation for a swim you didn't ask for. So, they had to adapt. How did they do that? Simply put, they engineered their way out of it. They built a legendary system of dikes and polders, which are parcels of reclaimed land, pumped dry and walled off from the sea. On top of that, they created an elaborate network of canals that keeps the water moving where they want it to go. It's genius if you ask me, but they didn't stop there. See, the Dutch have a saying, God created the world, but the Dutch created the Netherlands. And they aren't kidding. About a fifth of the land you're walking on was pulled right out of the water. They literally manifested their own soil. So if you find yourself strolling through Amsterdam and wondering how it became the way it is today, now you know, you probably won't look at those famous canals the same way. Because as much as they are aesthetic, they are equally functional. They are the city's life support system for water management. Of course, that's not only true in Amsterdam. Go southwest and you'll find the Delta Works. It's a series of massive storm surge barriers, and dams so advanced they are considered one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. So, you know, it's a pretty big deal. And as it turns out, when you get really good at solving impossible problems, the rest of the world starts calling you. Okay, so picture this. It's 2021. A massive cargo ship called the Ever Given gets itself wedged sideways in the Suez Canal, completely stuck. And just like that, roughly 12% of all global trade grinds to a halt. Billions of dollars. Frozen. At this point, the world is panicking. They're asking the same question. Who do we call? The answer. Smit Salvage. A Dutch company, of course it was. Because here's the thing about the Netherlands. This tiny country is an absolute economic powerhouse. They aren't just participants in global trade. They basically built the foundations for it. Even today, the Netherlands is a top 10 global exporter of goods. On top of that, it's the second largest agricultural exporter in the world, trailing only the United States. Think about that. A country the size of Maryland exports more food than China, Brazil, or Canada. Rotterdam's the biggest port in Europe, and Amsterdam. It's ranked as an alpha global city for how deeply it's wired into the world's money. Again, we ask how? How does a country so small do all of that? Well, it started a long time ago. Back in 1602, the Dutch didn't just launch the Dutch East India Company. They also invented the modern stock exchange and the concept of publicly traded companies. So when people talk about how global capitalism works today, the blueprint is written in Dutch. But they aren't just selling stocks and cheese anymore. The Dutch are exporting knowledge, specifically the kind that keeps entire cities from drowning. Case in point, Singapore is using Dutch polder engineering to expand its own land. Jakarta, Cairo, New York, and New Orleans are all working with Dutch teams on flood infrastructure. They even manage the water operations at the Tokyo Olympics. Pretty impressive, I know. But I hate to break it to you. That's just the good news. Now let's talk about the reality check. Because it hasn't all been smooth sailing lately. Energy prices and global conflicts have put pressure on the Dutch model, which relies so heavily on open borders and steady trade. Inflation has been stubborn, and while the economy is growing, it's a bit of a slow climb. And current forecasts expect GDP to grow by about 1.2% or 1.3% through 2026, which is down from 1.7% the year before. So what are the economists saying? Well, the Netherlands entered this turbulence from a position of massive strength. Household savings are at record highs. We're talking over 517 billion euros tucked away. And wages have actually been outpacing inflation recently. As one of the country's biggest banks, ABN AMRO, put it, the economy can take a hit. It turns out that when your entire history is a fight against the tide, you learn how to build a boat that doesn't sink. And in it, a people that doesn't drown. You might not know this, but the Netherlands is probably one of the most open, tolerant, and gezellig nations on the planet. It's got nearly 200 different nationalities calling it home. And with over 90% of the population speaking English, you'll rarely feel like an outsider here. But don't mistake that openness for softness. Those are two completely different things. See, the Dutch are famously direct. They don't sugarcoat, and they don't do polite fluff. They tell the truth straight out, not to be mean, but because to them, honesty is the highest form of respect. After all, this is the culture that built a global trading empire on precision and ironclad clarity. In a country where every centimetre of land and every litre of water has to be managed, being vague is actually dangerous. So don't be surprised to see that same mindset in their attitude toward time. If they say dinner is at 6 p.m, they mean 6 p.m. sharp. And dropping by unannounced. Don't even think about it. You schedule your social life with the same precision they use to manage their dikes. But don't be intimidated, because underneath all that practicality lives something incredibly warm. I mentioned it earlier, gezelligheid. It doesn't have a direct English translation, but it's the soul of Dutch culture. It's the feeling of a candlelit cafe, a deep conversation with an old friend, or just a sense of belonging in a space. It's cosy, yes, but it's also more than that. It's a shared sense of contentment and being present. You see this not just in daily life, but in their art too. Rembrandt painted light emerging from total darkness. Van Gogh turned his deepest struggles into a riot of colour. Clearly it's an ongoing theme. The Dutch have a way of turning something difficult into something beautiful, whether it's reclaiming land from the sea or finding gezelligheid in a grey, rainy afternoon. It's that resilience that keeps them a powerhouse, historically, economically, and culturally to this day. So if you enjoyed this video, you'll definitely love this next one.